So what we're going to talk about today is really this idea of leveraging functions and leveraging components inside of WeWeb and Xano. So when we look at what is available to us, I first just want to say thank you so much to Art and his team for being able to allow me to come and speak about WeWeb and Xano and how to leverage these types of apps to really build something powerful and at scale. And I really do believe that it is a powerhouse of a stack, and we'll talk about that briefly today. But without context, my name is Anthony Smith. I'm also from the Seattle area, as spoke about earlier. I am former Microsoft, previous startup leader, and currently, as Art noted, Xano and WeWeb agency co-owner with my wife, and we're helping to bring software dreams to life. And with pleasantries aside, let's go ahead and dive into why we're here. So earlier in my career, I had this adage: you must go slow in order to go fast. And at the time, I didn't really understand what it meant. It seemed counterintuitive. However, as I learned what it meant over time, I saw that really it became more prevalent inside the low code development space than anything else. You have to go slow to go fast. Out of a desire not to repeat myself, and really a desire to drive for better time management, I saw alignment with how Xano and WeWeb operate from a usability standpoint and specifically a reusability standpoint. And we'll see that today. So after trying out many different front ends and back ends, what we've landed on specifically was WeWeb and how they leverage no code components, which is relatively new, maybe about 3, 4 months old. And then Xano and how it uses functions and its recent update, which is middleware, and how those things tie together. The flexibility is completely insane. And to help me illustrate this, I want to talk about something that we all know and love: theme parks. So when we look at theme parks, for instance, we know that users are similar to employees or guests that come through the park. When we look at the back end or Xano, it's more like the park machinery or the items that you don't necessarily see that are running all of the things inside the park, allowing them to function and be smooth. And so, for instance, the ability to sell tickets or calculate ride wait times or send notifications, all those types of things would happen then on the back end from a Xero perspective. And my website, this is essentially the ability to be able to see like the ride or the shops and like the decoration and really that pre-built element that allows you to really get a feel in the customer experience, right? So both of them paired together. When you look at a Xano from a back end, the machinery, and then when you look at the WeWeb from a front end, the ability to have a great customer experience through components, these types of things really make and break the experience of a user. And ultimately, as you build, it's going to help you make a faster building decision, more confident building decision. And that is what we're going to discuss today. So without further ado, we're going to talk about clonable tables. We're going to talk about some functions, middleware, and really how we use maybe even a background task if we have time. And then we're going to specifically dive into WeWeb's component structure as well. So let's go ahead and dive into a database here. And so when you look at a database, it's going to start off as being empty. I've created this admin template table, and we'll talk about it very quick. I think from a clonable table, it's good to start with, at least best practice I've seen, is it's good to start with a table that you know that you can copy and paste or templatize. So every table as standard comes with ID and created that, but we're going to add a few more columns in here, and then we're going to continue to clone this table as we build it out. So modify that. We want to know when the record was modified. An EID, there is a concept, that Xano just came out with called a UUID. Essentially, it's just a string of 32 characters with some dashes in between. And this just helps enhance security. This is really good to pass to the front end. And so that's why you'll see ID in here, which is a sequential 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. And then an EID, or I'm sorry, what I'm calling an EID, but it's a UUID. This is going to allow us to pass things to the front and still have it be identified without giving away my database ID structure. And then name and description. So these are pretty common fields that we're going to see with every single table. And so what we're going to go ahead and do now that we have this is we're going to look at our indexes. It's not really important when you first start out if you have a small amount of tables, but as you grow your tables, indexing will be really important. We're going to index on modify that, and then we're going to index on this EID. So once again, not necessarily important when you start out, but important as you scale. So in terms of reusability, cloning is really awesome. And we're going to start with creating a users table. So what we're building today is essentially an app. I'd send out messages to some of my friends in different spaces and say, hey, consider what a problem is that you have within your industry and a simple type of solution. And one of my friends, a real estate agent, came back and said, hey, you know what? Like, I have an issue where I have tons and tons of different contacts, whether it be photographers, roofers, cleaners, movers, stagers. And sometimes they're on my phone, sometimes they're online or whatever, or they've moved or whatever. And I have to go get their information from a catalog. And I don't have a centralized location on where to get my contacts and basically like a place to review them and know that, hey, this is a great contact to use for a future job. Right. So essentially, that's what we're going to be able to create today a little bit if we have time to finish it all. But we'll go ahead and start with our users table. Right. So every database needs some type of users table. In this case, our users are going to be real estate agents. These are going to be the only users that sign in. Now, specific to user tables, we'll want to make sure that we come into settings and turn on the authentication. This allows, and usually you'll do this for one table, but this allows us to be able to ping this table and say, hey, this is a authenticated user or not, right? And generally it's only going to apply to one table. So like we said, we clone the other table, but in this particular case, we don't really need maybe name more than we probably need first name or last name. So we'll go ahead and create those different columns right now. Great. So first name, last name, and inside our user table, we also want to create things like email, for instance, password, obviously. We'll want to include type. So specific to real estate, there are different types of real estate agents that are out there, and you can have a default value, but we're not going to set one. And so there's obviously the agent, there's maybe the broker, there's the buyer's agent, listing agent, etc. We'll get the point. So we'll go ahead and save that. And this essentially creates our user table. And we'll go ahead and skip these first two columns here. And we'll go ahead and place myself as a user. Great. Then we'll do a super kind of easy password. Then we'll set it to just the real estate agent. Perfect. So we have a user in there. And then now next we want to be able to create contacts. So per our app idea, we'll want to come down to the admin table and we'll want to clone this table again, but this time we'll want to call it contacts, right? And so we'll go ahead and save. And this goes ahead and creates what we need. Now, granted, we'll go ahead and start this process again. We'll want first name of the contact, last name of the contact. We will also want the email of that contact as well. Phone, super helpful. Little bio. And there's other ways that you can create tables, but this is just a quick way to be able to do that. We'll call this photo. We'll want a photo of that contact. And then last but not least, we'll want a type again, but this time the type is going to be different because we'll want to know if they're maybe a photographer or cleaner or a mover, handyman, contractor, oops, etc. So we'll go sign installer. Okay. So these are just example types of columns. Obviously, use cases may differ, but we have something to start from. So this kind of at the onset really gives you an idea of how to create a template table and be able to clone that table multiple times with having all of the indexes in place, etc. So you don't necessarily need to recreate that. Now it's pretty simple, but I just wanted to really touch on the idea of how to speed up process in terms of building. Next, we'll focus on functions. So inside of a function, you can do plenty of things, right? And so, for instance, functions come in handy when it comes down to forms are a great use case for functions and being able to capture a form on the front end and then obviously retrieve it on the back end. And you can create an API endpoint for CRUD and be able to appropriate each field to each specific item when it comes to a back end and front end and bind those things together. But what we've done here is we've created a JSON called data. And data is going to be our catch-all JSON that allows us to be able to obviously catch the contents of the form. What we want to be able to do is create a variable that takes the input of data. So it takes this and creates a variable called form data, right? And then we've set a precondition that says, hey, is this form data, is it empty? If it's empty, if that's false, then we can move forward. If it's true and it is empty, then go ahead and stop us in the tracks and give us back this error message that says the form data is incomplete. Please add data, right? So, and that's pretty standard. So we'll go ahead and just run this without any form data, and we should get back that error, right, as we see. So that's super helpful in terms of validation and being able to do that on the back end. But if we are able to move forward, what we're expecting to see from a front end perspective to be passed to the back end is that your form data should get the first name, or if not, return null. And this is really important because sometimes, for instance, a user on the front end, as much as we may try, may not have filled out or completed the first name or last name or photo or bio or whatever. And this just allows us to have a fail safe to say, hey, if form data dot first name, if that's empty, then return null. And then that way it still goes into our record, but it's obviously blank. And so we've done this for every single variable here. So first name, last name, email, etc. And then we're going to generate a UUID. So like I talked about before, that EID, or what I'm calling EID, which stands for entity ID, there's no real difference here. But the idea is that a UUID, like a universal ID, a unique identifier, is being called here. And that is what is going to be added to this table. Now you'll see that it's a deleted table. So we'll go ahead and add record into our contacts table. And we'll go ahead and plug in values that we have above. So modify that, which is currently right now as the record is being created, it is being also modified. And then the EID, we'll go ahead and plop that in. First name, last name, you get the point here. But because we've done the work of doing the GET request up above, so we were able to have that fail safe, we're now just able to apply those variables to these row columns really simply. Okay, great. And then we'll go ahead and rename the output. Sometimes it has this contacts one. I just like to have it all lowercase here. We'll save it as contact, and then we will delete our former record here. Great. And then what I always do as well in terms of scale and ability is being able to create a variable called result. And then whatever my last variable is going to be, I plug that into result. Thus my response is always result. It's just really easy. And then from the output perspective, remember, we don't want to send over all of this data. We just want to give them the EID and maybe everything down below, but the front end doesn't need to know the database ID. So we can come into customize response and then go ahead and turn some of these items off and then leave the rest of this on. And frankly, for photo, we probably only need the URL. It's probably the most important. The rest of this stuff, I think we can leave without. So we'll go ahead and save this. We'll save that and we're good to go. And then now we want to make sure that we publish this record. So now, in spite of being able to type all this in, I have a code block here. I'm just going to paste, and then we will go ahead and create our first contact. Great. So this essentially has created our first contact, and we have no photo in here. And that's cool. We can always come back to our database table, come to contacts, for instance, and we can upload a photo here, and let's throw this photo together. And then now, for instance, we have a photo for this record, and we have a user. Okay, so the other part about functions, which I find to be really helpful, is this idea of finding that repeatable action. So we already talked about adding a contact. We know that's going to be repeatable. We've assigned it to an endpoint, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But uploading an image is also something that's going to be repeatable as well. So for instance, when we have a contact ad, we want to be able to upload a profile image. When we have a real estate, like a new person coming in from a real estate perspective, we want to be able to grab their image as well, possibly. And by abstracting out the logic and not having to create an image inside of every single API endpoint, we can just create a function here that says upload an image. Now, just like the Xano docs suggests, we'll want to be able to create a file resource. I've called it photo. And this is basically can take a base 64 encoded image, and then we can apply that to a image metadata, right? And so how you do that is you'll come here, you'll go to storage, and then the first part in the input, you'll click on create a file resource. And then the second part down here, create image from, is going to be right here, create image metadata, right? So we'll use both of these two aspects, but it's found underneath file storage. So within the create image from, you'll want to make sure you'll tie your photo to the value, right? And then the file name is going to be a concatenation of two other endpoints that I use seen here. So file type and file name. We'll start with file name. That's obviously whatever you want it to be. And then on the end of every file image, there's usually a dot PNG or dot JPEG or whatever the case may be. So we're going to go and recreate that. So file name concatenate. And what we're going to concatenate is the file type with a dot as a separator, right? So it's just concatenating the file type with the file name. And then and then we're going to return it as a variable called image underscore upload. So what this does is, once again, it allows us to create the image really quickly. So we'll go ahead and use this as an example. We'll click on my friend Adele, great singer, and we'll go ahead and type in her name. And we'll go ahead and put this in as a PNG, right? And so we'll run it. And as we see, it comes back with a PNG. Well, what if we wanted to do JPEG? No big deal. We type in JPEG and we go ahead and run. And now it's a JPEG with a different URL to the path. And all that can be found in your public files section over here. So once again, it just helps in terms of scaling and moving forward, because if you extract the logic in terms of uploading an image, not inside your API endpoints, but inside your functions, it makes life a little bit easier. Now we're going to kick it up a level and talk about middleware. And middleware is relatively new, but in the days of old, aka 3 months ago or so, and before, what most people have to do in terms of authentication was create a function that we just talked about and assign it a role, and basically say like, hey, if you're a user coming into this application and you have this particular role, then great, you're allowed through or you're not allowed through, right? If you don't have a role at all, you're not allowed through. If you have a particular role, then you may pass. And so in the days of old, we would have to create a function and then apply that function to every single endpoint that we wanted to see benefit of, or to be able to gate a particular output based on role. And so imagine with me, you had 100 different API endpoints, and imagine with me, now you have to go plug that function in to 100 different endpoints. That becomes cumbersome and very time consuming. So middleware is essentially abstracting that. And now we're able to, in one function, if you will, create your authentication security check and apply it to multiple API groups and multiple API endpoints, thus acting as a blanket security group, where if you need to make a change, you make it to one before you go and make it to every single one. So we'll talk about this in a second. But first, let me discuss what middleware is. I think the best example of middleware is really our experience when we go to a restaurant, right? So when we go to a restaurant, we're obviously there for food. At least I'm there for food. And it's going to be great. But we have this experience that happens before and after we get our food. The waitress or waiter comes and serves us. They ask us, do you want water? How many people are joining us today? All these types of things. Consider middleware as that, right? So there's two different types of middleware. There's pre and then there's post. In pre, it's essentially acting as that waiter that's saying, hey, do you like, what types of things can I do? Or what types of things can I get for you prior to your food coming to your table? And then post is, once you have your food at the table, what types of other items do you need? Do you need ketchup? Do you need extra water? Do you need an extra drink? Do you need dessert? Right? Those types of things that happen. So there's pre and there's post. We're going to use pre today because most people have access to one middleware. And I want to be able to show how that is used in the most common sense, which is authentication. So as you see, it looks like a function, but you have two inputs and you can't add any more inputs in here. So you start with vars and type. What we're going to do is we want to be able to see if they match our role. Now, generally you would have a role table, right? And you would section against that role or filter based on that role. But we have a contacts type or a agent type table. And so we're going to grab a function, a new function relatively called database schema. And what this then, we're going to look at the agents table or users table. And basically what this does is it's going to give us the schema of the table, which is pretty cool. So the path that we're looking for is also called type. You'll see input enum. It's pulling this type and that's wrong. That's not what we want. So, and that's just because I called it type, and also here it's called type. So you'll want to make sure that you'll come over to const and click on text. And this just wipes away the enum type in the input and gives you the actual type that we want here. And then we're going to return this as path. And then I'll go ahead and delete the previous one I made. Awesome. And then just so you know, in terms of what that gets us, my favorite function is called stop and debug. And we're going to stop and debug at path, right? And we're going to go ahead and run this and you'll see what it produces. So essentially this is the schema of that table, right? So when we look at values is an array of items that we created earlier, right? When we set up the table. And this is actually what we want. And we want this because we want to be able to tell what the role of the user is and if they're allowed to move forward. And you can go down to specifics. You can say, I only just want real estate agents, or I want everyone on this list as long as they're in this list. And we're going to choose the latter for this example. And then in this next variable here, we're grabbing path.values. So if this entire object is the path, we're looking in here and grabbing the values, which is just this array. So that's going to equal the values here. So I'm going to go ahead and comment out or disable this. And then, like I said, we're going to now go ahead and get a record from the agent table. Okay, so basically what we're going to do is we're going to get a record, the ID based on the auth ID. And that's because at the time when this middleware is ran, the user would already be authenticated and we will be able to know if that user's ID matches the ID from the user table here. And we'll go ahead and change the output because we just don't like that very long name here. We'll go ahead and change it to agent. All right. And we'll go ahead and just comment out what was there before. Okay. And as we move through, we want inside of the agent, we want the agent dot type, right? And that's going to essentially be this list of items here and turn that into a safe array. So based on whatever the user would have selected as their type, that's what we want to be able to return. Okay. And then we want to intersect between what the type was versus these values here. And basically, if they intersect, if they find alignment, if one of the values from the agent type column matches any of these values, which they should, then go ahead and move them forward. And there's a precondition to that effect. So this precondition says, hey, if the count of that array comes back and it's above 0, then great. Go ahead and move them forward and give them the result. And that result is going to be status of success, right? And then you can move them on to the function. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because we want to be able to know if the user is an authorized user or not that can access a specific endpoint. So this is super, super helpful when we talk about authentication, because let's say you wanted to deliver a customized experience to your users based on a certain role and one specific role versus another role. Maybe you wanted to deliver a different type of experience or different color theme or different app even to different users, but also maybe even those people that have logged in X amount of times. Say, for instance, you had an onboarding flow and everyone gets it the first time they log in, but then they want to be able to, you want to be able to collect more information later down the road once they log in, let's say the 7th time into the application, because then by then you'll have enough data to ask an additional question set. And so you can use this for many different things, and you can use middleware in such a way that says, okay, once the user has logged in 7 times, then you can basically say, yep, show them X message. But if they log in before the 7th time, then just go ahead and send them on to the homepage. So these are just certain things that you can create. Imagine what you can do with function stacks, which is pretty limitless. You can do the same thing here in middleware, but all of it happens before your main function runs. Okay, so with that kind of out of the way, I really want to just get to some of these API endpoints, and then we'll head to the front. So just at a high level, we have our authentication. We have a contact, being able to create a contact. As you see here, we've added in our function. So we have our data coming from our form in the front, that data tied with the data on the function, and then we placed in the function inside of our endpoint. And then this is just a simple get record. We have no table here, so we'll go ahead and query all records and contacts. And we will go ahead and change the output to contacts. And because this is going to the front, we'll also want to make sure we take off our ID and create that. And we're going to remove everything but the URL. And I think that's good. And we'll go ahead and save. And we'll just comment this out for now. We'll publish. So it gives it the most current view. And that's our contact section. And then options. So this is, we're using our database schema again. We'll go ahead and connect this really quickly. This is coming from the agent table. So we'll go schema, agents, and same thing here. It's called type. And we'll want to make sure that's text. And we'll change this to path. We try to keep this as common as possible. That way, it's just easy to make changes. And we don't have to change any of this stuff because it's the same nomenclature that we're using. And so this allows us to get all the different types of agent types that are available to us that we created in our table. And we'll do the same thing again for contact types. Now, Gray, you can put both of these into a function. And then that way I don't have to create this inside the API endpoint again. But just for speed here, we'll go ahead and just make this quick change. So this is contact types. And once again, type in type. Perfect. And we'll change this to path. Cool. And we'll comment this guy out. Awesome. And we'll publish. Okay, great. So we have our options. These are going to act as drop downs for us. And super simple. It's just an array with the options we already had. So we'll bind those. This is our contacts. This allows us to see all the contacts that are available to us. And then this is the ability to add a contact. And then we have some off components here. Now, as we jump over into WeWeb, I already have a few things here, but we'll go ahead and do the process here where we sign in, right? So we want to go ahead and sign in. And I think I have to remember, I think I created a user, Anthony, email. Okay, perfect. So we'll go ahead and do that here. Anthony email.com, super secure password. And then we'll go ahead and sign in. Oops. Oh, it's likely because I deleted this table here. So 1 second. So get record from the users table. And we want to get the ID from email. Email is the field, and we want the input. Okay. Just to validate. Yep. Cool. All right. So we'll go ahead and disable that. We'll take off the one here, the end. Perfect. Save. And then we want to add a record to the users table as well. Okay. So we'll go ahead and know some of this stuff. Okay, cool. Perfect. And type, we'll go ahead and select that to be row state agent so it doesn't bomb out on us. Okay, we'll go ahead and publish here. Cool. All right, so we're back. Oh, and that was sign up. Now we gotta do login right quick. Apologies, good practice. So we're going to get the record from the agent table, and we're going to do, this time it is still not authenticated. So we're going to go email and email. Yep. And just to validate that. Yep. Great. And then we will take off the one. And the precondition looks good. Everything else looks good. So we'll go ahead and hit publish. Okay, cool. And then the last one we need to make sure that WeWeb uses is this off me endpoint. And we'll want to get a record from that off me, point that to the users table, and we'll call this result because that's what they had. So perfect. And once again, we want to return not our ID and obviously not password, and we're good to go. Okay. So, and then we'll comment this guy out and publish this as well. Sweet. So anytime you make a change or delete a table, this is what you have to go through. So try not to delete your table as we just experienced. It could be a little bit painful here. Okay. Why are we having issues here? Okay. It says I'm missing users, and this was on mission. Oh, yes. So here, this is text, and this is actually another good point too. It's really easy sometimes to see text versus variable. Make sure it's the variable. Otherwise, it's not going to work as we just. So I just want to make sure that the rest of this is set appropriately. And then we'll go ahead and publish this. And I don't think that was on this is the login. I don't think it was on the off me. So I think we're good. Okay. Third time's the charm. Okay. It looks like it's still missing this piece. I really want to get to the other page. Let's see if I can just bypass that page here. Okay. So what we're going to see is the ability here to work with WeWeb components. And so essentially, yeah, I've created a modal in advance that allows you to add a contact. A real estate agent is adding a contact. You can basically now add first name, last name, email, and then their phone number, which is a mask, a new element that came through about 6 months ago or something from WeWeb, and then their job type. And this has the ability to be able to drop down. Now, generally, I would bind this job type. The reason I was trying to log in was usually you would bind the job type to someone's ability to log in, and then they're able to see something that's specific to their role, right? In this particular case, I made it available to anybody and everybody. And so we'll be able to click on the job type and then the bio, right? So now, for instance, you can come in here and let's do Esteban email, random phone number, right? Job type, contractor, and then what they bio, he cleaned the grounds and does cement work, something like that, right? And so that kind of creates your experience. You can upload a photo, which is really helpful. We'll go this guy for Esteban, and then you see the experience here. And unfortunately, if I were to hit continue, it's going to try to save the form, but because I was unsuccessfully able to authenticate, then it's not going to run. It could give us back an error. But just know that if you were authenticated, that it will run and then it will add it to what we see behind us, which is a list of different contacts related to the user. Now, for instance, in terms of scale and being able to grow, what's really important is this idea of components. And inside of components, specific to WeWeb, there's this really cool aspect. And what you didn't see, but what I'm about to show is that this modal inside of this modal is actually a component. And the beautiful thing about having a component is that all your logic, all your variables, all your workflows, your triggers, your events, all that is contained in this component. So you're not creating global variables all the time, but you're sticking in your logic, just like we did in Xano for function. And what we're doing in WeWeb with components, you're sticking all your logic inside of a component. Well, how do you get there? So I'll click off of this for a second. So we'll take this button as the example. When you click on any type of element, you generally, it has to be an element, not a section. You'll see, at least for now, you'll see the ability to transform to a component. So I took a div that was inside the modal and I clicked on the button, transform to component. I gave it a name of modal component. And then I'll show you where we ended up. This is where we ended up. So it essentially darkens the back of your screen a little bit. It creates this effect now where you're able to look inside of your modal component. You know it's a component because it's green. So if you've done it successfully, and you'll see here you have properties, you have data, actions, formulas, and events, right? With triggers. So I usually create my triggers first, and that just helps me to understand what do I want done with the form, or sorry, what do I want done with the component when it's done. Now, granted, we're not going to have what we need to be able to complete this, but I have just a simple idea of what's needed. So for instance, this is a form on a modal, right? So once the form is complete, I want to be able to trigger something back to the front end user who's using this. So I click new, and then it starts with a label, and then I'm able to type it in and I can hit save. In this particular case, I did form is complete and save. So this just really helps me to stay organized and focused on what my triggers are. So it could be something like complete, it could be delete, it could be update, it could be on change of a first name. You want to go do something, you want maybe on change of an email, you want to check it against some sort of email system that says, are they part of your CRM or not? Or is it a valid email address? Those types of things you can do with triggers. And then variables. The second thing I go create is my variable. So because this is a form, I'm going to go ahead and create an object. This object is obviously named form, and this is really helpful. Now, what I do is I expose this, whatever my final object or my final variable is going to be. I usually expose this to the front because this is going to be helpful in terms of grabbing that later if I need to use it in any other scenario outside of the component, right? And then we have our properties. Properties you can spend days on just for fun. but your properties are something like this, right? Add a new contact, right? And so we have title here. Title is going to be a text, but obviously you can choose whatever you want, right? There's tons of different options. And the default is add a new contact, but we can also change the default to add a new agent. And if I save, you'll see this change from contact to agent. If I've done my job correctly. And if it's bound to title, which it is. Oh, agent, save. Okay. Oh, and it has to be agent. That's right. Okay. Interesting. Well, we will, oh, it's still some contact agent because that's the default, but I had written over it and that's why it wasn't showing. But if you didn't have anything, then it would default to obviously the default. So we're going to go ahead and do add a new contact as an example, because that's the name of the form. Now there's different types, right? We can add an agent, we can add a contact, and it really depends on what we want, right? So the concept here is that you can create the same form and essentially based on type, you can run it to different types of endpoints on the back end, all within the same component. So we'll go back into editing this component. And like I said, we have our form object here. This is going to collect all of the information. Because this is a form and we see we have a form container with all this stuff inside of it. And we have a button. This is our submit button. And because we have a button here that collects items from the form, we can now come to our workflow and change the variable of form, right? Because this is the one that we created inside of the component. Oh, and I just wiped away what I had. That's a bummer. But essentially, we can essentially put all of these items into the object, right? And so just for show, I won't do all of it, but we'll go first name, last name, and we'll go email, just to give you a sense. So this kind of gives you just a sense of how the form would be if we were to complete the rest of this process, which I had blown away. And then we have a trigger event. Now this trigger event is important because this is going to symbolize once the button submit is completed or clicked on, it's going to generate the form object, all the things we need to say this form was completed. And then it's going to trigger the form is complete, that first trigger that we created. And it's going to return as an event, the form, the object of the form, right? So if we hit test, we're going to get back first name, last name, email, all of them are going to be blank, right? Now, the very cool thing about this is that when we come back out, so we go back to instance, we can see that on this component, we have a workflow. And this workflow essentially here, it's saying add a contact and you'll notice this looks familiar. Form is complete. So on the workflow form is complete or on that action, I want you to actually go take more action, right? So when the trigger of form is complete, I want you to go add this person as a contact, which isn't going to run for me because I'm not authenticated. And then once you run it, it's going to add them to the record of contact. And then it's going to fetch the contacts data, which we have up here. Once again, it's not going to run because I'm not authenticated, but it's going to fetch this. And then based on that fetch is going to show up in this list. Now, this is super, super helpful because this is just one aspect of a component, but there's many more components you can create. Some other components I've done is audio-based components. So the ability to be able to record your audio and play your audio back as an audio player. The ability to, and then within that audio player, being able to change colors or change photos. If we wanted to take this sample preview card and maybe move the image up here, or maybe move it up above slightly of the container box, and then add some additional things down below. Outside of these aspects and items, we can all within the same component. So we can show multiple different aspects. And I think the best use case of this is if you're familiar with WeWeb and the starter plan, you're able to go into the starter library, and button are a good use of this. So buttons, for instance, you'll be able to see if the button there's state buttons, right? So if it's disabled or success or warning or deletion type button, but then there's also buttons with icons, buttons with loaders. And so there's so many different components that you can make with just buttons alone. The most salient point here is that you can take a component like we have here in this modal, and you can extend this out to larger components. So think of it like your components can be inside of components, which can be inside of more components. And it does get a little bit complex, but the power of this is scale and speed, right? So if you are now able to build a component, save that component to your library in this kind of library section, this is not really the focus of the talk, but if you save that component as inside of the library, then you now have a catalog of different types of components that you can use across your entire application build. And so instead of creating that modal again, you can just go bring that component in and select what type of modal that you want, and then it will appear. So, and obviously you'll be able to bind certain things. I've done this with like form builders. So being able to build like radio button questionnaires, the ability to do audio stuff, the ability to do graphs. It's really good for graphs. So being able to do charts. And if I wanted to do a pie chart and a line chart, and I have a client that says, hey, you know what? The line charts looks good, but I actually want a pie chart now. I don't need to really stress. I can just come to my component and click pie chart instead, and everything gets built out. So that's really the power of components. And this is just a small little taste and example of what is possible. And yeah, so that's really the journey of how to use functions and how to use WeWeb components and how to really blend those things together to bring about a faster, speedier innovation cycle so you can be meeting your clients or your own business needs as they occur. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was amazing. I know I learned a ton of things that I didn't know, especially about Xano and building functions in the back end. I know there's at least one question, but this would be the time for those of you that are here to put any questions in the chat. As you probably figured out here throughout this demonstration, that Tony is a true expert for both WeWeb and Xano. So if you have any specific questions, definitely ask them. The first question that came in, Tony, was, is it possible to build a SaaS with WeWeb and Xano?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's essentially so I have a few use cases right now where I've built SaaSes. Right now, so we have a local hospital up here in Seattle called University of Washington, and building a application for their speech pathologists to be able to use with their patients, which is awesome. And they're loving it. They're getting great value. I'm also building a dashboard scenario for a client right now who essentially wants to be able to use this dashboard every single day and be able to see the latest sales metrics or latest telemetry metrics from different data sources, etc. And then I'm also building a market research tool. We're almost done with it. That essentially takes, think of it like type form, and it takes all the different questions that you would ask from a type form perspective. And now you're able to see that, and you as the user can create these different types of question sets, and then have your participants go into the question sets and get their questions answered on a particular product that they're about to launch or anything of that sort. So yeah, short answer is yes. Long answer is just examples of where I've done that. So it's totally possible.
Yeah, and I apologize. I am having trouble with my video, it seems like, but that's okay. You don't need to see me anyway. I think I know the answer to this question, but just for the benefit of the group, no problem integrating something like Stripe in for the purpose of a SaaS to charge your customers and connect all that to your users table, allow customers to authenticate in when they're current under billing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no problem with that at all. I mean, actually, I do that in a lot of different scenarios. Handling payments is like normally my number one thing I try to tackle. If there's an app that's going to require payment, I usually do that first. But yeah, it's totally easy. You can do that on the back end. You can do that on the front end. It doesn't really matter, but it can get done. So
Okay, great. Yeah, Edgar had a question, which I think we just answered. Let us know if that answered your question, Edgar. But can a web app built with WeWeb and Xano handle payments to my users? Yes, the answer is yes. Another question here, what are the limitations of WeWeb and Xano? What can you not build? Can you refer to real world examples, please? For example, if I want to build something like SurveyMonkey, clone, whatever you want to do it.
yes, yes. And actually, my recent kind of example of like market research tool, that is probably as close to SurveyMonkey as possible. Unfortunately, like I can't show you it because it's still under NDA, so I can't show you that. But what I can tell you is the aspect of being able to create that is initially what sparked me into components from a WeWeb perspective, because I was creating, we have multiple choice, single select, text, image, video, like we have all these different aspects, and each of them are a separate form, which each of them have separate logic. right? So just like a survey monkey would, right? And so by leveraging something like components, I'm able to abstract away all of the complexity of each individual form. And then now I can use the power of components to combine my forms together. And then that way, when a user comes in and they want like a welcome scenario or a leaving exit scenario or an audio scenario, I can leverage the same component. So all that to be said, I built that same exact thing. And yes, it is possible. In terms of the limitation of WeWeb, it leverages, unlike Bubble and some of these other low code software systems out there, it leverages standard web practices to the best of its abilities. So it uses JavaScript, it uses HTML, it uses CSS. Those are the cornerstone of web development. So anything you can do pretty much on the web, you can do here. There are some edge cases, but for most people's scenarios, whether it be online course building or that scenario you just described around SurveyMonkey or Typeform or analytics type of work, yeah, all of it can be built. And maybe put a different way, I haven't ran into a use case that I couldn't build yet, and I built over 15 projects.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, I know that just being part of the WeWeb and Xano communities, I've seen some pretty wild use cases. And really, I think the limit is none, really, for the most part. I don't think, like you said, there's probably some edge cases, but for the most part, you can build what you want to build, including full on SaaS if you would like. Let's talk about, I think, Tony, if you just have one more minute, designing the front end. I know that some people might say that WeWeb doesn't have a ton of templates. They leave you in most cases with a blank canvas. So, what are some of the best practices? Are we designing in Figma and bringing it into WeWeb, or what's the best practice for that?
Yeah, yeah. Great question. So I found in my own kind of journeys using a site called Mobin. I don't know how you say it, Mobin. I'm not an ambassador for them. I just really love them. And essentially, they have a catalog of some pretty popular sites that are out there. And let me just see if I can quickly just show you the webpage very quick. Mobin.com, I think. It's going to ask me to log in, but that's not what I want to do. I just want to show you the website here. And essentially, they have a catalog of different type of applications. So web-based applications, but and screen, right? So screens is my favorite. Let's take Discord as an example. So you can look at their onboarding flow and really like see what the flow is. And that's really helpful for me to gain a sense of like, okay, like these other companies have spent millions of dollars on how onboarding flow should work. I'm not going to try to recreate the wheel. Let me like go learn from the best and how this stuff kind of works. And then I can copy the Figma. When you copy the Figma, it's not the actual Figma it's not like what we would normally expect from Figma. It's just an image. So all of these are just images that go over to Figma. So it's not really that helpful, but at least you can visually start to conceptualize like how you would then go build a specific component. And then from here, I think it's time underneath the belt of building stuff like this. If you're comfortable with Figma, then you'll definitely be comfortable in WeWeb, where essentially you can look at a design such as this and say, okay, well, there's going to be an image, and maybe this image is going to be absolute because this guy's foot is above the card, and there's a card here, there's some button, right? And then you can come back in here and recreate something similar to that and just smooth it out around. So yeah, that's essentially how I would go about creating stuff, and that's what I've been doing for a little while.
Perfect. That answers my question. Thank you, Susan. Are there any other questions for Tony? If not, Tony, I'll let you wrap up and please share how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in talking about their project with you or hiring you for consulting services.
Yeah, of course. That would be awesome. So if people do want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email, hello at corporate synergysolutions.com. Just make sure you spell that correctly. Sometimes we get bounces back. So corporate synergysolutions.com. And then you can also follow me on Twitter, low code mastery. So just hit me up anytime you have any questions, whatever. And right now, just know that if you're looking to get into the space or you have any questions about your build or your projects, I'm happy to consult, happy to help. And then more importantly, if you're looking to get a discount on Xano or WeWeb, then please get in touch with me and I'm happy to get you a 10% off discount on Xano. And then if you're new to WeWeb, I can get you a 10% discount. If you're not new and you've already paid, then I can't, but I can definitely help you out with your project. So yeah, so with that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your attention more so. And if you learned something, please just share it with others and let's just keep the conversation going.
Amazing. Thank you so much again, Tony. This was really great.
Awesome. Thank you, Art. Appreciate
Bye.
it. Bye, everyone.